Welcome back to another Spirit Island video. In this video, we'll be covering another tier list, this time looking at major powers. Now, this is a tier list that I've done in the past, but that was over a year ago, and I want to revisit this topic, this time with updated criteria, as well as more games played, and also we'll be able to cover those new NI majors. So, looking at F tier. These are majors that feel bad to use even when you decide to draft them as a meme. Now, what do I mean by that? What I'm referring to is when you're so far ahead in the game, it doesn't matter what major that you pick, you're still going to win the game. So you tend to pick just random weak majors to try to make them work. These are majors that still feel bad in those cases. Looking at D tier, these are going to be cards that are rarely are the right choice. There's almost always a better card in the draft that should be picked. To quote a player in my group, they said, "You feel bad if you see these cards and wish you drafted a minor instead." Now, we're not going to look at C tier this video. That will be in video 2. So let's look at my F tier here. We have 2 cards, and this probably shouldn't surprise you because these are the cards that are excluded in my games because they are, I have house ruled them out. And I believe these are the worst majors in the game by a landslide. Now, let's look at Transform to a Murderous Darkness. This is a 6 energy, slow power, moon, fire, air, water, plant. Target any spirit. That spirit chooses a sacred site. In that land, replace all of their presence with bad lands. The replaced presence leaves the game, and those replaced presence become bad lands. Push any number of bad lands. You then get 3 fear and then 3 damage per presence replaced. So at a minimum, this card is going to give you 3 fear and 6 damage, 6 to 8 damage in your target land, assuming you keep the bad lands in that land. And then you then lose 2 presence, and that is for the cost of 6 energy. And this is just really, really not good. 6 energy or 6 damage slow for 6 energy is just not a it's not a good investment of energy. There are a lot of other cards that can do this for far cheaper and can also do it in the fast. Like Vigor of the Breaking Dawn, we'll talk about that in the high up tiers. But that's a card that literally does the exact same amount of damage, but costs half as much. It's easier to threshold, can hit multiple lands, and costs half as much. Now, of course, that's a broken card, and this is a very weak card, but it just shows you just how bad of a card this is. This is a card that I think I've seen used once. I mean, players try to make this card work all the time. Now, making it work and it being the game-winning card is, I think, pretty much non-existent. I think there was one game where we had a player pick it up and it did some work, but I think there was other choices they could have made and still have succeeded. Now, the threshold is a 3/2/2, so a very reasonable threshold, and you get to do 1 damage in an adjacent land and then 1 damage in an adjacent land again. And before I go any further, I'm going to talk about good thresholds. So the easiest thresholds are going to be your 2/2s and your 3/2s. These 2 types of thresholds are most spirits can threshold them, and these are very favorable. Then you have your 3/2/2, which is a little bit more challenging, but it's still pretty reasonable if you're on element. And then the tough thresholds are going to be your 3/3s, your 3/3/2s, and your 4/2s. These are pretty much not, you can't really hit these thresholds unless you're getting supported or unless you have a lot of perfect element drafts. Very challenging to hit these types of thresholds. So this is a 3/2/2, so fairly easy to hit, though the threshold is very underwhelming. So looking at the other very bad card, we have Grant Hatred, a Ravenous Form. It's a 4 energy, slow power. It's a moon fire, 1 range. For each strife or blight in target land, 1 fear, 2 damage. If this power destroys all invaders in target land, you get to add a beast. And then if you have that 4/2 threshold, that's fairly tough to get. You get to add 3 adjacent strife. So first, destroying all the invaders to add a beast. This basically is just flavor text. Really, the beast ad isn't going to matter in your games, I promise you. In addition, like, this is just not, like, this is just, you can cut this from the card. It has no effect on what the card's doing. The top part, it's 4 energy, slow power, and it's a damage effect that scales on the number of strife, which is fairly hard to put in a land. And same with blight. Like at most, you're gonna have 2 blight in the land, and if that's the case, that means you've likely cascaded. So for four energy slow, you're only going to be doing 4 damage and 2 fear, which is just a very bad transaction. In addition, it has the worst elemental combination in the game of Moonfire. At least transform, you're going to have 5 elements, but Grant Hatred is just Moonfire, which is a very bad elemental combo. The threshold is very tough to hit. This is just a card that never really sees play. There are times where I was hoping it would see more play because it comboed a little bit with Wandering Voice, because Wandering Voice adds a ton of strife and can consolidate those striped invaders. But the problem is that was before they had buffed the right innate on Wandering Voice. Wandering Voice's right innate used to it did damage, but nowhere near was as effective as it is now. And a lot of times, Wandering Voice had to dig for these types of major effects such that they can kill those invaders. But now, the right innate can completely kill invaders in the land, so you don't really need that major anymore. So really, Grant Hatred just a dead draft. I mean, Trickster does. I mean, I guess Trickster could use this now that I think about it. This is like the one card here. This Trickster uses a lot of strife. You have the free moon, so really this card is only a 3/2 threshold, which isn't terrible. Um, but for 4 energy, no, I mean it's still pretty bad. The threshold is hit, like you can hit the threshold, but at 4 energy, it's just not good enough. But yeah, these are the 2 majors largely seen by the community as being cards that are just the worst. There isn't any other cards that are down here. These are in their own separate category. Okay, let's take a look at D tier. Now, before I go into D tier, I just want to emphasize that for this video, all because I have cards lower on the tier list, that doesn't mean you can't make the card work on a spirit. It just means the number of spirits that are going to want to be able to play and use that card is going to be pretty minimal. So looking at Grant Hatred and Transform, these are 2 majors that no spirit in the game wants. I mean, like I said, you might be able to make an argument for Grant Hatred with Wandering Voice or maybe Trickster, but outside of those 2 spirits, this card just doesn't want to be taken. And then same with Transform. No spirit really wants to make this card work. So cards that are lower on the list are going to be majors that are taken far less than cards higher up on the list. Okay, looking at D tier here, I have 2 lines. This first line of majors, I see these majors being like top of D tier and these over here being bottom of D tier. So let's look at bottom of D tier first. Now, the order that they're placed here, it's randomized. I didn't actually put them in a specific order, but these cards I think are at the very bottom of D tier. And remember, these are cards that I tend to like when I see them. I'm like, man, I really wish I saw another major. I really wish I drafted a minor. Just very niche cards that have very few cases where they're useful. So looking at Savage Transformation, it's a 2 energy slow power moon animal, 1 range. You get 2 fear, replace an explorer with a beast, and then if you have the 2/3 threshold, you can do it again in an adjacent land or the target land. Now, it's an excellent card at getting rid of explorers versus Russia. The problem is when you're playing against Russia, this is an adversary that's going to reward players that are playing a minor-based style of play. And that's because Russia demands you to have multiple valid actions. And if you're playing minors, you're not going to be drafting majors, so you're not really going to see this card very often. So that's the biggest problem I find with this card. In addition, a moon animal threshold, there's only really 1 spirit in the game that can really get that reliably, and that is Sharp Fangs. Like Wounded Waters doesn't have that moon. And then Many Minds has the moon animal, but you tend to not want majors at all on Many Minds. And this is not the type of, oh, I shouldn't say that. It's just that the majors that you want into Russia particularly is not Savage Transformation. Or for Many Minds. So like Many Minds wants like skips, land clearing effects. This is more of an effect that is going to stop those smaller lands from coming up. And for many minds, this is not what many minds wants in particular. Um, I'm trying to think of other spirits that would want this card. Like I think Hearth Vigil could like maybe make it work. It's an easy threshold. But once again, like Hearth Vigil doesn't want majors at all. Like the optimal Hearth Vigil builds are minor based, are minor focused. So like the spirits that want this card don't want to get majors, and then this card is very limited in its matchups. Like I'm saying all these good things about Russia, but like what about the Scotland games? What about the England games where this card just has no text? Um, I think if this card was fast, you would see it a lot more because now a fast explorer remove with two fear, I think is pretty viable into a lot of matchups. Like if I saw this card into Russia or into especially into France, if I grabbed a major into France, I'd be like, okay, I might consider this card. Um, but this as it currently stands, not many spirits want this card, and it's just not good against the current adversaries. So Mists of Oblivion, it's a 4 energy slow, moon, air, water, 3 range, 1 fear per building it destroys, and then 1 damage to each invader. And then it has this 2/3/2 threshold that does 3 additional damage. This card is so weak. You're paying a lot of energy to do just a very weak Raging Storm. And once again, Raging Storm is that lightning unique that deals 1 damage to all invaders in a land. It's very similar, but at least it's in the major deck. I do have it here in D tier and not F tier because at least you can play this card and it will have text into Russia as it can kill all explorers in a land. So at least it could stop like a possible double ravage. It also has some text maybe into France if you're playing with like a finder and they've thrown everything in one land. At least then you can kill all of those explorers. But unfortunately, the 4 energy is just a huge price point. Like if this costed 2 energy, it would still be. I mean, if it costed 2 energy, I think it would see play. But at 4 energy, it's just not good enough at all. It also doesn't get any fear. Like you have to kill buildings, and it doesn't really kill buildings. You have to combo it with another effect. So that's another thing that makes this card really weak. The range is really generous though, but like 3 range, a lot of times, if you're playing optimally, you'll be able to hit all of your range with just 2 range. You'll be able to hit everywhere where you want with just 2 range. So the 3 range just tends to be, I guess, win more. So like I'd rather this said like 2 range, and then they completely boosted the power level of like this as well as this as well. So we have Vengeance of the Dead is a 3 energy fast power moonfire animal. Once again, another 3 range. You get 3 fear, and then it says after each effect that destroys buildings or Dahan in target land, 1 damage per building / Dahan destroyed. If you have the 3 animal, you may do the damage from this power may be split into adjacent lands. So the bottom threshold allows this card to become an AoE effect. Now, unfortunately, you need to kill a lot of buildings to get that AoE, and like to get 3 points of damage, you need to kill 3 buildings or 3 Dahan need to die. So once again, this is another card that you have to combo with another card, and even when you're comboing, it's going to feel very underwhelming. It also has that Moonfire, which is a pretty bad elemental combination. Now, I have it over here in D tier and not F tier, is because at least it generates 3 fear fast. So this can at least progress the win condition because you're 1 fear away from getting a fear card by playing this card. So at least there's that. But most of the time, this is just a very, very weak card. Focus the Land's Anguish. It's a 5 energy slow power. It's a sun element, 1 range. If this power destroys any buildings, you get 5 fear, and then you can gather up to 5 blight, and then 1 damage per blight. If you have the 3 sun threshold, you get an additional +1 damage per blight. So it's a way for you to gather up all of the blight on your board and condense it into 1 problem land. And then you generate a lot of fear. The problem is it costs so much, and you only have a single element. So like when you're playing this card, you're pretty much committing to not thresholding your innates unless you're a Sun Spirit, and that tends to just be a pretty bad game plan. In addition, the 1 Sun, like we have Relentless Gaze of the Sun, right? You'd think this card would be good on Sun, but it's just not. This is not a card Sun wants because it costs a lot of energy, and 2, when you're playing Major Focus Sun, you're only going to have one card play, and this is not the type of card you want to be playing with your one card play, because one damage per blight, that doesn't matter. You already have a card that does that for 0 energy, right? You have a card that's already going to be doing 1 point of damage, and you can move Badlands, right? So like for 1 energy, you get 3 points of damage with that card, which is likely going to be more damage you get here with for 5 energy. Um, Now, of course, this card can do more. You can threshold, you can move blight around. I get it. But a lot of that stuff just doesn't matter for Sun. And I feel like this should be a card that Sun wants, and Sun doesn't really want it. But yeah, so 5 energy, slow power, just it's not good enough. I mean, how would I improve this card? I mean, I think I would have this be at least 2 damage per blight. I don't know what I would do with the cost. I mean, the answer to everything is just make it cost, leave the effect the same and adjust the cost, but I don't know how I would affect this. Okay. Lastly, we have Dissolve the Bonds of Kinship. It's a 4 energy slow power, fire, water, animal, 1 range. You replace a city with explorers, a town with explorers, and a Dahan with explorers. You then get to push all of those explorers into different lands. You have the 2/2/3 threshold. The explorers and buildings damage each other, so it allows them to kind of clear each other. This is another effect that is I have it down here in D tier because there's so many matchups where you're never going to want this. Like, imagine if you're playing HME or France or Russia, where it's like, here, let me like replace all these buildings with explorers and then throw them all over your board. The fact that this card is pushing these invaders means it's going to hurt those control-based strats. It has a weak elemental combination of fire, water. Like, I think the card is fine if you can threshold it, because at least the explorers and buildings trade, but there are very few spirits that can. You have like Vengeance that can, Wounded Waters that can, but even then, this card is still pretty underwhelming on those spirits. Like those spirits can pick this card up and make it work, but it's not a card that they're excited to be playing, if that makes sense. I'm sure there's plenty of other better cards that they should be picking than this card. But overall, this is a card that I just don't want. Like England, I mean, you get rid of a city and a town for 4 energy, which just feels just not good enough, and you don't have any fear attached onto it. Okay, let's look at top of D tier. Once again, these cards are in no particular order, and we'll start over here with Manifest Incarnation. 6 energy, slow power, Sun, Moon, Fire, Animal. You get 6 fear. It's 0 range targeting a city land. You then get 1 fear per building, and then 1 fear per presence that you have in that land. You then remove a city, town, explorer, and then the invaders ravage. And then if you have the 3/3 threshold, you get 3 extra fear. So, unfortunately, this card is always going to be causing a blight. I shouldn't say always, but like almost always it will. Just because when you're playing this card, you want to be playing it in a land that has a ton of invaders to get a ton of fear off it. Unfortunately, the 3/3 threshold is just not very good. Once again, 3/3 thresholds are tough to hit, and to only get 3 extra fear to hit this is pretty underwhelming. Like if it said 3/3 threshold, 3 fear, and then it just said invaders don't ravage in the land, then I think that'd be fine as the threshold. But doing -6 damage is just eh. I think the card is high D tier because a lot of times you're going to pass this card up, but there are going to be those very few games where this card is going to be game winning. It also has that Sun Moon, so it at least can help hit a lot of good thresholds for spirits. Also has that animal, but I mean, a lot of times this card has a high potential to generate upwards of 10 fear, which could be game winning based on the board state. A very fun combo is to use this card with like a Finder and have Finder throw all of the buildings in one land. Then you play Manifest, and then you get like 30 fear with it. Pretty cool, but 6 energy is just not. I think the cost is fine for the effect. I just think the effect is very niche, and it requires a lot of setup. When a lot of other majors in the game require a lot less setup and cost a lot less and can do a lot more. Okay, looking at Death Falls Gently from Open Blossoms, the 4 energy slow power moon air plant, 3 range, you have to target jungler sands, you get 4 damage, and then you'll likely add a disease. 3/3 threshold for 3 fear, and you can add 2 more disease. I think this card would be a lot better if the threshold was a 3/2 threshold, like a 3 air 2 plant. I think you'd see a lot more play. But 4 damage for 4 energy, and you have to target a Jungle Sands makes the card very restrictive. Like the Jungle and Sands makes it restrictive, and then the 4 energy for 4 damage means it's a very you're paying too much and you're getting too little. And then like you're likely not clearing the land because you want the disease ad. So the card is kind of like it's fighting against itself because it wants you to choose lands that are built up, and then you're going to add the disease. But then again, when that land comes up again, that land is going to ravage because there's still going to be invaders there, and you're going to blight. So the card doesn't actually solve the land. Um, and then the threshold's too high, and then of course the jungle sand targeting. Now it's sad because this is a card that I would love to play because I love playing roots, and it's a perfect element card on roots. I love playing like green. I love playing eyes. These are spirits that would love to make this card work, but it's just not good enough on those spirits. I think eyes, this card actually has some amount of text because you can pretty reliably threshold it because you have the air plant on bottom track. But with roots and with with roots it's a lot harder because getting 3 air cards is pretty challenging. Okay, volcanic eruption, 4 energy, or it's not 4 energy, 8 energy, slow power, fire earth. Targeting from a mountain, slow power, 1 range, 6 fear, 20 damage, destroy all Dahan beasts, and then add a blight. So for 8 energy, a huge investment, you're going to wipe out a land. Basically wipe out a land. And you can add a blight. If you have the 4/3 threshold, you basically destroy all invaders in the land, you add a bunch of wilds, or I guess you add 1 wilds, but then in adjacent lands you do a ton of damage, that 10 damage, and then possibly add more blight. So if you threshold, it's a board clear, and the top part is just a land clear. Just like Manifest, there are going to be cases where this card does have text, but those games are going to be very few. And because it costs 8 energy, that's going to prevent a lot of spirits from being able to play it. And part of that is just because the major economies of spirits are designed to play those 3 and 4 cost cards. And 8 energy means you really need to build multiple turns, or you need to prepare multiple turns in advance for this card. And even when you hit it, it doesn't feel like it's a game-winning effect, right? Well, I mean, if you threshold it is, but if you don't threshold it, it's just not. Like I think 8 energy for the threshold is fine, but for without it, it's just way too weak because you have cards like Vigor that exist, and for way less energy, you can solve multiple lands. And here, you solve a single land and you get a blight, and you cost way more and have way more restrictions. So, okay, looking at Fire and Flood, it's a 7 energy slow power. It's a sun, fire, water. You're going to target 2 lands from the same sacred site, and then you're going to do 4 damage in each of those lands. You have the 3 fire and the 3 water. You get to increase the damage by 4 in either of the lands. So you can do a lot of damage. This card is seen to be good by a lot of players, but really this card is bad. And that's just because, once again, just like Volcanic Eruption, you're paying a lot of energy and you're not getting a lot of damage. Now, at least this is 7 energy for 8 damage, which is a lot better, and you can split the damage into 2 lands. But into a lot of adversaries, it's just not enough. Like England, for instance, this just kills 2 cities for 7 energy, which is just really weak. There are some spirits that can make this work, like Immense Lightning can, Dances, where like Snake loves this card. I guess Volcano can as well. There are some spirits that can play this, but because of that 7 energy, a lot of spirits just can't afford it, and the effect just isn't good enough. I think if the thresholds were a little bit more interesting, I think this card might have text. I think the card would have text if it costed 5, it for sure would see play. It would probably be too good. I think if it costed 6, I think that's where it would probably be. Yeah, I think the cost is between 5 and 6 as it's currently designed. Because 6, I may consider it, but at 7, it just gets passed up all the time. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say about this card. I think if the water threshold allowed for some control, I think the card would be way more interesting. That's the other thing. I don't like that increasing water is doing damage, but that's just my opinion. Okay, looking at Cleansing Flood, it's a 5 energy slew power, sun, water, 1 range from a wetland. So you're going to do 4 damage in the target land and then remove a blight. You have the 4 water threshold, get 10 damage. So once again, 4 of a single element is going to be very hard to hit. So this is going to, a lot of spirits won't actually get this. And Cleansing Flood has a similar problem as Death Falls, in that you're paying, well, in this case, you're paying 5 energy, but you're paying 4 to 5 energy to do 4 damage, which is just a very bad investment. In addition, you have Jungle Sands targeting versus targeting from a wetland, so it's a fairly similar. You have fairly similar challenges when trying to make the targeting work on the card. In addition, just like Death Falls, you want to have invaders to have a disease, so you're not really solving the land. And once again, Cleansing Flood, you're doing 4 damage in the land, removing a blight, and a lot of times you're not solving the land still because it's only 4 damage. So it tends to not be good enough. Like, another thing is I always think this card costs 4 energy, and I'm like, man, I wish this card costed less. And then I'm like, wait, it actually doesn't even cost 4, it costs 5. So a lot of times whenever I see this card, I always go through those mental gymnastics. I find pretty funny. Looking at the Land Thrash's in Furious Pain, it's a 4 energy slew power, Moonfire Earth. 2 range targeting a blighted land, 2 damage per blight in target land, 1 damage per blight in adjacent lands, and then once again a tough threshold of a 3/3 to repeat it. A lot of times this card just doesn't have text because it requires a player to have a ton of blight on their board, which means that that player has to be far behind. And in order to get value from this card, and a lot of my defensive spirits, we're not blighting that much. And if we do blight, you might have 3 blight, which means this card is only doing about 4 damage for 4 energy. And as we've talked, that's just not a good investment. I think this card has a lot more text in multiplayer because there are going to be players who play shadows and who play weaker spirits who are going to be blighting a lot more. And then you might have text in those games. Very similar to like Focus, where the card is a lot better when you're playing in a multiplayer setting because you can target another board and help out another board with these types of effects. But a lot of times I just find this card just not to be good enough. Now I think Earthquake, now that Earthquake exists, this card I think has a lot more text because that threshold is far easier to hit. And Earthquake can kind of throw this in Impend and then kind of donate it. But yeah, just not very a good card. So the Wounded Wild turns on its assailants 4 energy, slow power, fire, plant, animal, targeting a blighted land. You get to add 2 bad lands, gather some beasts, and then 1 damage per blight, beast, wilds. Once again, you're paying 4 energy, and likely this card is going to be doing about 3 to 4 damage because there'll be a blight, you'll have 2 bad lands. It's just not a good investment. 4 energy for 4 damage, not good enough. At least you get some tokens, and at least it combos with beasts, but it tends to not fit into a lot of spirit shells. It does have this 2/3/2 threshold, which just adds a bunch of fear. But like I think the only time I've played this card is on Fangs, and even then it doesn't even feel like a good Fangs card. It's like, okay, I did some stuff, but that's about it. Yeah, pretty underwhelming card. Pillar of Living Flame, 5 energy, slew power. It's a single fire. It's a Sacred Site, 2 range, 3 fear, 5 damage, target a jungle wetland. You have to add a blight. You have the 4 fire. You get to do +5 damage and +2 fear. I think at Threshold it's pretty good. It's 5 energy slow or 10 damage and 5 fear is really good. But once again, 4 fire, 4 of the same element is very tough to get. In addition, it's a 1 element card. So if you're playing this card, you're likely not hitting your innates unless you're a fire spirit. And looking at those fire spirits, like, are you going to be playing it on Wildfire? I mean, I wish I could, but I mean, Wildfire's economy is just pretty botched, so you really can't. I mean, I think, yeah, it's just not good enough. I mean, 5 damage for 5 energy with 3 fear attached is probably okay, but then again, you can't target jungle or wetlands, which kind of makes this card somewhat awkward to use. I wish the threshold was a little bit more interesting. I know Emily has a version where she says that the card would be like essentially gets, after you play it, it gets put like in Impend and then comes back the next turn. Threshold it. I think that's really cool. Like because it's on theme, right? It's this living flame. It's constantly coming back to the board and doing damage. I find that to be pretty enjoyable, but as written, I think this is still fairly weak. It's very similar to like Cleansing Flood and Death Falls, where I think it's like close, but like the what you're paying for or what you're paying is just not good enough for what you're actually getting out of the card. And lastly, we have another one of those cards that fits into that same category, where it's Accelerator Rot, 4 energy, Slew Power, Sun, Water, Plant, 4 energy for 4 damage, and 2 fear. And then you have to choose Jungle Wetland. So once again, 4 energy for 4 damage, just not good enough. And then you have this 3/2/3 threshold, where you get extra damage and you can heal a blight. Once again, 3/3 thresholds are very difficult to hit unless you're really on elements. Um, Now, I do think if you do threshold it, I think the card is worth what you're paying for, but it's going to be very challenging to hit it. And this is coming from a Roots player, too. Like, this is a card I don't pick up much on Roots, and, like, Roots is one of the best spirits that can actually make this card work. Um, but yeah, so as you guys notice, a lot of D tier is 4 damage or 4 energy, and then also a lot of just very niche effects that just don't fit into a lot of spirit shells. If you like this video, like, subscribe for more content. I will see you guys in the next video.